Chapter 16. Forced Confessions. If I had any doubts that Belinda was telling the truth, and I wish I had, they would have been snuffed out the following afternoon when I received a phone call from Nicholas Cosin. "Is it all right for me to talk?" he asked, in a low whisper. Which I thought was overly dramatic. He sounded like someone with a hoarse throat. "Pardon? Is this a secure line, Mrs. Logan?" he exclaimed. I nearly laughed aloud at his cloak and dagger style, but that was what these people were paid to produce, I supposed. "Of course it is," I said. "You think my telephones have been tapped?" No, not at all. I've completed a report following your instructions for hard facts as soon as possible. I thought I'd give you the highlights verbally. During the past week, your sister was in Boston twice. She checked into the Admiral Inn, which is just north of the city, and signed her real name. "Belinda's not a spy," I reminded him. "She's my sister." "Yes, of course, but when people conduct clandestine affairs, they usually take some basic precautions." "Not my sister," I muttered. That was painfully true now, I thought. "Yes, I see." Continuing, he went on rather in a nasal tone. "She was soon visited by a prominent Provincetown attorney." He paused. "Are you sure it's all right to give this to you over the phone?" "Please finish," I snapped. "I have a desk covered with business that cries for my immediate attention." "Yes, I'm sorry. You surely know the gentleman to whom I refer, Nelson Childs. I think he is recently appointed to judgeship. He remained at the location with your sister for nearly 3 hours the first time, and a little more than 4 the second," he added. What could possibly keep Nelson there so long, I wondered. It surely couldn't have been Belinda's conversation. Were men really that easily amused? Making love for 3 or 4 hours didn't seem a possibility to me either. Even when Samuel's groping and wet and sloppy kisses, we never had sex more than 10 or 15 minutes at the most. What could Nelson possibly do with Belinda for 4 hours? These meetings between the two somehow confirmed, I followed. I took some pictures of him entering and leaving. You took his picture? From a distance, of course. I wasn't seen, I'm sure. It's what I do for a living, Mrs. Logan. "I like those pictures today," I said quickly. "Very well. I did some discreet questioning, Mrs. Logan. These meetings were not the first. They were meeting at this location a number of times before these 2 occasions. I have certain indisputable evidence and, all right, there's no need to go into more detail over the phone. However, I don't want you coming to the office." I told him and gave him directions for our rendezvous in the next 2 hours. When we meet, he handed me the packet that contained the detailed information and pictures, and I gave him his check. "Thank you," I said. "I have no more need for your services." He nodded and gazed at me for a moment with a little curiosity, then left. I felt dirty using him. Despite his polite ways and businesslike manner, his profession and purpose seemed as sleazy as a peeping Tom who had turned his depravity into his life's work. I shuddered at what I had him do, but then I sat in my car and went through the documents. Mr. Cosin was meticulous with his details, going so far as to describe the weather conditions at the time of the assignments. Somehow he'd gotten copies of the room receipts as well. He had more than a dozen in an envelope, covering the period of 4 months. It took my breath away. What a good liar Belinda had been, and what a better liar Nelson Childs was. Having the confirmation in black and white as well as the pictures didn't make me feel any better, any stronger, or any more complete. It left me with a stomach that resembled a washing machine, tossing and turning its contents. There was a deep emptiness in my chest, as if my heart had shrunken, and like a cavern echoing with heavy thump, thump, thump. I took deep breaths to bring in cool air and turned down the furnace under my breasts. It had been one thing for Belinda to make her confession, but another to gaze at the clear colored photo of Nelson lumbering along toward the entrance of the inn, his face bright with expectation, eager. When he left, the pictures reveal he wore a look of a satisfied, confident man, his shoulders back, his head high, pride rippling across his lips. I returned to my office and worked as hard as I could for the remainder of the day, trying to chase back those images. Toward the end of the afternoon, Samuel stopped by to remind me tonight was his weekly card game with the fishermen cronies down at the wharf in Ailes' house. Unless you have something else in mind for us, he added. He always added that, and I always said no, nothing. I'm too tired to do anything tonight anyway, I said. You look down, Olivia. Aren't you feeling well? I'm just tired, Samuel. I had a lot to do today. If you were here more, you would notice. I wish you would let me do more, Olivia. I really do, he said in a whiny, pleading tone of a voice that I had come to despise. We'll see, I said. He nodded again, skepticism filling his face. As soon as he left the office, I sat back and thought about what I would do next regarding Belinda's situation. There was no sense in putting it off, I decided. I got up close to my office door, then called Nelson's office. Just one moment, Mrs. Logan, his secretary said. I'll see if he's available. Oh, he's available, I thought, and waited, my heart puttering like an outboard motor. Olivia, Nelson cried, what a nice surprise. Business or pleasure? Neither, I said. You and I have to see each other tonight, Nelson. Pardon me? I've been sitting here thinking of an appropriate location, and I've decided my yacht. We'll have the required privacy for certain. Be there at 8, I said sharply. He was silent for a long moment before replying. What's this all about, Olivia? It's better that we discuss it at 8, Nelson, I told him. This is rather short notice. I promised Louise I'd take her to a movie, and I wouldn't be calling and making these plans with you on such short notice if it wasn't important to both of us, Nelson. Maybe we can meet tomorrow night, he began to suggest. I have something I can easily cancel in the Admiral's in Boston, I said. What? I don't really think I have to repeat that, do I, Nelson? 8 o'clock, you'll find me on my yacht, I said and hung up, my heart now beating more like it was gong in a grandfather clock. Concentrating on my work was impossible for me after that call. Every time I began something, I found my eyes slipping off the page and my thoughts wandering back to Nelson's voice on the phone. Would he have the nerve not to show up? Finally, I decided to give up and leave the office for home, a little earlier than usual. Samuel noticed the difference in me at supper and kept questioning me about my health. Belinda, who sat like a beaten puppy at the other end of the table, her eyes low, her words few and far in between, glanced at me each time he inquired. I told you, I just got tired, Samuel. Leave it be, I finally ordered. Just trying to be a good husband, he quipped and looked at Belinda for support. But unlike any other time Samuel smiled at her, she dropped her eyes quickly. Needless to say, he was eager to leave and get to his card game in happier surroundings. As soon as he left, Belinda turned to me. Did you do anything yet, Olivia? No, but I'm about to, I told her. What should I do? There's nothing for you to do. You've done it all, I growled. She started to whimper. You're wasting your tears, Belinda. Daddy's gone. She pulled up her head and glared at me. You're gonna really hate me now, aren't you? You're gonna make my life miserable, she predicted. No, you've done that yourself, I said calmly. I'm going to rescue you as much as your little life as I can, and as much of our lives as I can. That appears to be my role in this family. You enjoy it, she accused, her eyes smaller now. She followed that with a mad light laugh. You always did. You should have been a school teacher or a minister, or better yet, a prison matron. I am what I have to be, I said firmly. I don't have time to enjoy it, believe me. I don't expect your thanks, but I do expect your respect, Belinda, and especially your appreciation. She held her smoldering look of resentment for a moment longer. Then her face folded as she shrank into a tight ball, wrapping her arms around herself and looking down. I'm going to meet with him tonight, I revealed, and she looked up, her eyes wide. Tonight? Where? It doesn't matter where. I don't want you there, I said. What will you say? I'll come to see you before you go to sleep, I promised, and tell you everything. She nodded, looking more grateful than defiant now. I knew what she was about to say. Don't say it, Belinda. I'm tired of hearing how sorry you are. Please, just go to your room and watch television. Talk to your empty-headed friends. Fix your hair. Be yourself. And wait for my instructions. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. Even she knew now that in the end, excuses were like fabled straws everyone tried to grasp to keep from falling. The only thing that could help her from sinking any farther in this life was actions I would take on her behalf. That realization was written in her eyes. She rose and left the dining room with her head lowered like a flag of defeat. But I harbored no pity for her. She was the one who was crying. She was the one who was carrying Nelson Childs' baby, not I. I spent some time with the boys before I left the house. Thelma had done wonders with Jacob, actually teaching how to read a little and teaching him additions and subtractions. He loved to show off for me. Chester was far more physical, walking months before Jacob, and thus becoming a constant problem because he could reach for things that he had interest in touching, everything in sight. Twice already he'd gotten into Samuel's fishing tackle and tangled himself up so badly he had to wail for help. Samuel thought it was amusing, but I warned him that if he left his gear out again, I would dump it into the garbage. Jacob has more sense than you, I told him. Jacob was so much more serious when I came to watching his younger brother and keeping him from doing mischief. I began to wonder how two boys from the same parents could be so different in nature. Our yacht was moored at the dock behind the house. It was a 62-foot sailing cruiser, driven solely by sails and included living facilities. Normally all the deck chairs were put away, but Samuel had used the yacht the day before. This particular evening was murky with fog. I could barely see 20 yards out to sea. I saw Nelson emerge from out of the swirling mist, looking like a figure rising in the darkest underworld. He strode along firmly, his posture revealing his anger and annoyance as he swung his arms as he approached. "Well," he said, boarding the yacht and standing in front of me with his hands on his hips, "I'm here as you commanded." He wore a light jacket and a pair of dungarees. I stared at him a moment, then looked at the fog. "Why don't you sit, Nelson? This will take a while," I said calmly. He hesitated, then plopped into the desk chair across from me. "So? You've been seeing my sister for months and months," I began. "As recently as last week," I added. "She told you that?" "No, she didn't tell me half of it," I said. "There's no point in you denying it either," I said. I reached down to turn on the lantern, then handed him the folder that Nickel and Colson had given me. He twisted his lips into a crooked smile and shook his head. "What is this, I wonder?" He read and I waited as he turned the pages. When he found his pictures, he blew a soft whistle. You had us followed, he said incredulously. I did, on a suspicion that quickly turned into a dreadful reality, I said. I can't believe it, he murmured. Imagine how I feel, Nelson. I think I'd feel more betrayed than Luis will feel, I said, with the light glow of the lantern on his face. He looked as pale as a ghost, his eyes strangely haunted. You intend to tell her? He finally asked. No, I replied, and took a deep breath. I'll leave that aspect of your life to you. Olivia, I have no defense except to say my life has been complicated lately. I needed some distraction and happened to meet Belinda in Boston one night, and she can be so beguiling. I shouldn't have succumbed to the temptation again, I know, but I had been drinking and she was so full of lightness. I don't really want to hear all that, Nelson. You did quite a job on me and put on some act, especially that fiction about her asking you for work. I should have realized that Belinda's too simple to deceive and connive. He nodded and leaned forward, his hands clasped. I want to promise you, to swear to you on my children, that from this night on, it's too late for that, I said, with a heavy voice, the voice of a judge pronouncing a severe sentence, in a voice he himself knew so well. What do you mean? He gasped. What are you going to do? He waited through my silence a moment. Surely you realize this won't do either of us any good, Olivia. This town feeds on nasty gossip. There are real sharks in these waters, Olivia, he continued, his voice rising with warning. Don't underestimate any of it. Please consider both our families and... Belinda's pregnant, Nelson, pregnant with your child, I blurted. Even in the dim light, I could see his face turn blood red. He seemed unable to speak, unable to move. Finally, he realized a small gasp, and then he took a deep breath and shook his head. No, she can't be. She told me she was on the pill. She even showed me the packet. She can't be pregnant. She's lying. It's been confirmed by a doctor, Nelson. Belinda might have taken 1 or 2 or even a dozen pills, but I'm sure she missed days and neglected them, leaving what we would emphatically call a window of opportunity. And since she's been with you these past few months, repeatedly with you, as evidenced here, I continued, indicating to the packet of papers and pictures, driving one nail after another into his weakened manly armor. There's no doubt that you're the father of Belinda's illegitimate child. Oh no, he cried, covering his face with his hands. This can't be true. His shoulders shuddered. What was I thinking? How could I be so weak? I couldn't permit myself to feel any sorry for him, but a small warm feeling managed to penetrate my fortress of anger. I had hoped to sit and enjoy his turmoil and squeeze his remorse dry, but the affection for him I carried in the secret places of my heart sounded a note of mercy. There's no point in dwelling on what happened. It happened and it's done, I said softly. What are you going to do about it? He asked, dropping his hands from his face, still handsome, but dark and grave. If she's having an abortion, I'll pay for it, of course. She's not having an abortion, I said. It's too late. I can't be that late, Olivia. I don't mean physically or medically too late, Nelson. What do you mean then? He asked, almost as a whisper. Belinda has made this sort of mistake before, I began. We always cleaned up her messes and limited her suffering to minor inconvenience. Yes, but using this as a means of teaching her a lesson, I'm not just teaching her a lesson, Nelson, I said sharply. My eyes held his for a long moment. What do you want to do? He asked, practically pleading. She's having the baby, and the baby will live here with me, I said. No one will know the identity of its father. He sighed with some relief, then his thoughts turned charitably to Belinda. You know, of course, that this will destroy her and this community, Olivia. I really haven't held up any hope for her in this community. Nelson. Belinda's never gonna amount to anything, I pronounced, with the certainty of a biblical prophet. Do you really think you should decide all that for her, Olivia? The decisions were made a long time ago, Nelson, I replied. I'm just carrying them out, trying to cope. He shook his head. Well, if you're determined to do this, I suppose there's nothing I can do to stop it. I laughed. No, hardly, I said. He looked at me sharply. What do you want from me, money? I'll call you from time to time to help with little ways. Always discreetly, of course, I said, nodding. As long as I can depend on your cooperation, that is. That sounds almost threatening, Olivia. It's not meant to sound that way, I granted. However, you should never underestimate my determination. No, he said with a soft, charming smile returning. I can see that. He sat back. The fog thickened. Drops of mist made our clothing damp. Does Samuel know? No, not yet. I'll deal with him later, I said. So he doesn't know that you intend to do about this child. Don't you think he should have a voice in this? I mean, you're going to ask him to be a father. I felt myself coil tightly like a spring. You'll always be the child's father, Nelson. You and I will know that, I reminded him curtly. Why are you doing this, Olivia? There's more to it. I know there is. Why do you want to bring up my child in your home? It's my sister's child, too. Yes, but there's more to it, Olivia. It should have been my child, I said, disbelieving my own voice, my own utterance. How did such a truthful feeling escape the prison of my heart? Nelson nodded. He seemed to understand. Don't do this, Olivia. It won't be what you expect it to be, he said, now sounding prophetic too. I'm doing it, I said. We're doing it, I corrected. He blew air between his lips and looked away. The first drops of rain began to fall. We're going to get caught in something here, he said. Let's go inside the yacht, I said, and rose. He followed, but with reluctance. I snapped on a small lantern in the lounge and sat on the sofa. He stood in the doorway, leaning against the wall, the rain growing harder. Then the small storm sweeping through. It won't last, he said. His damp hair fell over his forehead. How young and handsome he looked, and how much he reminded me of that night when he and I and Belinda had gone walking on the beach. That night he went swimming with her, and the night it all began. He stared at me. Olivia, you don't know what you're doing here. You can't play with people like you play with pieces on a chessboard. Chess pieces aren't made of flesh and blood and haven't feelings and emotions. You should be more grateful that I can play with people, Nelson. I'm solving your problem and saving your reputation, your career, your life. He smiled. How do you want me to show my gratitude, Olivia? You found it so easy to show Belinda how grateful you could be, I said. His smile faded. You really don't want us to. The rain tapped on the roof of the yacht, and it seemed to tap on my soul as well. Am I so distasteful to you? Of course not, but it's different. It's... what? Samuel's a good friend of mine, and... Oh, please, I said. Don't start quoting that fiction about males who've bonded and don't betray each other. You're all cut from the same cloth when it comes to this. He shook his head. I'm sorry you're so bitter. Are you? Tears came to my eyes. What do you know about being bitter? You've always gotten what you wanted, haven't you? You don't know what frustration is, what longing can be, how lonely it's possible to be. He fixed his gaze on me as if he were looking at me for the first time. I had to turn away, and while I did, he drew closer. I felt his hand on my hair, then on my shoulder, but I didn't turn to him. He sat beside me, then I felt his lips on my neck. I closed my eyes. How I dreamed of this, I thought. His lips moved to my cheek and his hand over my face so he could kiss my lips. Then he brought his hand to my breast and he pressed his lips harder against mine. The scent of his damp hair, the taste of his mouth on mine, the feel of his hand on my waist moving under my jacket and my blouse. I moaned and moved so he could lift my legs and run his other hand under my skirt. Then he touched me and my breath caught for a moment. I thought I might faint with excitement. "Is this really what you want, Olivia?" he whispered. "Yes," I said, my eyes full of determination. "Yes, it's what I've been wanting. And it's what it should have been." He said nothing. Instead, he began to undress me and then undress himself. Above and around us, the storm ensued, the sheets of rain now slapping against the yacht. The ocean rising and falling to create a frenzied rhythm that I wanted to capture and hold between Nelson and myself. He made love to me with his eyes closed, despite the fact that he was really there, really holding me and making me a part of him in the most intimate way a man and woman can become one. I didn't feel as satisfied as I anticipated. Wild, refusing to be disappointed, I rushed into an orgasm and felt him shudder inside me, both of us gasping like sprinters on a beach who had fallen into each other's arms. The rain continued to fall. Neither of us spoke. "You hated every minute of that, didn't you?" I accused. "I didn't hate it, Olivia, but what you expect is not something you can command to happen. You're so used to giving orders and having your way, you think that you can just apply the same technique to everything. You can't." I turned away from him. "I'm sorry," he said. "These circumstances is just not conductive to, it's just not romantic." "No, it isn't," he said. "And meeting Belinda in some hotel is?" I asked, with a sharp, cold laugh. "It was a fling, something to distract me, just as I told you," he said. "I'm not in love with Belinda, and I'm in love with my wife," he concluded. It put a lump of lead in my throat. I sat up and began to dress, and so did he. Suddenly I was feeling very cheap and foolish. I hated it more than I hated not having him love me the way that I dreamed he would. It was better to live in my fantasy than have this reality, I thought. The rain hadn't let up. "We'll have to run for it," he said, contemplating leaving the yacht. I found an umbrella and handed it to him. "What about you?" "I don't have to go as far," I said. "Olivia, I don't want to discuss it anymore tonight," I said. "I'll keep you informed, and you'll do what you have to do when the time comes." He stared at me, not with anger, but with genuine curiosity, as if I were some sort of alien creature. "Very well. If this is what you really want," he finally said, "I'm sorry." Those two words ought to be eliminated from our language. They are solely abused, I remarked. He nearly smiled, nodded, and opened the door and the umbrella, and then, with one look back, charged into the night and the rain. I watched him disappear into the darkness like some apparition, a ghost I had conceived out of my own illusions and dreams. For a few moments I stood there crying. I couldn't remember when in my life I had cried like this before. I hadn't even cried much when Mommy died, and the tears felt like drops that steamed on my cheeks. I finally caught my breath and wiped them away. I was soaked to the skin until I opened the door to Belinda's room, and she gasped when she set eyes on me. "Where have you been? What happened to you?" she asked. "You're drenched." "It's all over," I said, a voice resembling the voice of someone devoid of all feeling. "He knows what happened, and he knows what we're going to do. He realizes his obligation after you give birth." You mean he didn't try to get us to have the baby, not to have the baby? It's not for him to decide, to even suggest, I said. He has no rights except the right to be guilty. But Olivia, I'm really frightened, she moaned. That's nonsense. I won't permit it, I told her. I can't help it, she cried, grimacing. I walked into the room and seized her by the shoulders. You will help it. You'll do exactly what I want you to do. For once, you'll bear some of the responsibility for your actions, Belinda. Do you hear me? I shook her hard, and she just started to cry. Do you? Yes, she said, nodding. Good, I muttered, and I released her. Good. Get some sleep. You're going to live an exemplary life for the next few months, and you're going to give birth to a healthy child. I paused in the doorway. She looked at me with terror in her eyes. This you will do, I said slowly. This you will definitely do. Early one evening, 3 weeks later, the doorbell rang. We had just finished dinner. Belinda was upstairs and Samuel was down on the dock working on the yacht. I had gone to the den and had begun to look at some papers I had brought home when Effie came to my door. There's someone here to see you, Mrs. Logan. Who? Mrs. Child, she said. It was as if my heart fell into my stomach. I hadn't seen Louise for some time, and we had never really been close. She had certainly never visited me by herself. Louise Childs was one of those women who just seemed to grow more beautiful and more elegant with time. Having children hadn't taken away from her cellulite figure. She still looked like she had just come to life off a magazine cover. Hello, Olivia, she said. I hope I'm not intruding by this unannounced visit. No, not at all, I said. Please come in, Louise. She entered the den, gazed around, and then sat on the leather settee. I had taken many of Daddy's things from his den right after the house sale and moved them into my own home office. Is Samuel fond of guns? She asked, looking at the collection displayed in a case. No, those were my father's antiques, I said. Oh. I sat on the leather chair across from her. Can I get you something to drink, Louise? No, I'm fine, she said. She fumbled with the snap on her purse for a few moments. I suppose you know why I've come to see you, Olivia. No, I said. I'm afraid this is a total surprise. It's about Nelson and what he's done, she said, holding her gaze on me. I stared at her without changing expressions. He told me everything, she continued. I see, I said, feeling as if my body had deflated like a balloon and no longer had air in my lungs to utter any sound, much less sentences. I seized control of myself as quickly as I could and sat with my back a steel firm. What exactly did he tell you? Surely he hadn't confessed our sexual episode on the yacht as well, I thought. He told me about the baby, she said, and about Belinda, and what you want to do about it, she replied. Her eyes steady, her voice strong. I waited. That was apparently all he confessed. Even so, I was amazed that she'd come. I certainly underestimated her backbone, I thought. He did he? Yes. I'm not here to make any excuses for him, she added quickly. Then why are you here, Louise? I demanded. I couldn't help feeling another sort of betrayal. It had never occurred to me that Nelson would be so close to Louise and that he would ever share his sins. And it certainly never occurred to me that if he had, she would tolerate or forgive them. I'm here because I think you're making a mistake. I think you should consider finding another home for the child. Nelson and I have discussed it, and we're willing to bear all the costs. There are many couples who would love. You discussed it? You? It's my sister he has impregnated, Luis. I realize that, she said quickly. I don't come here to assign any blame on anyone, especially Belinda. I laughed. It must interest you to know that I don't excuse her. She's certainly at fault too. But as far as giving the child away, pretending it never happened, burying the facts, no, I said, shaking my head. I won't let that happen. But Belinda's future, it's my worry, not yours, I said. I sat back, pressing my fingers together and smiling as a realization gave birth to my mind. I understand now. You're worried that it will come out someday and you'll be devastatingly embarrassed. No, not at all. It's... Please, I said, holding up my hand, let's not add deceit upon deceit. I have assured Nelson that his fatherhood, or should I say sirehood, will not be revealed. You can rest as easily as you would be able to rest knowing what you do know, I said pointedly. Have you really thought this out, Olivia? Are you sure that this is what you want to do? She asked. Yes, Louise, it is. She saw my determination and she sat back, her lips trembling. It took every bit of strength I could muster to come over and speak with you, Olivia. Nelson told me your mind was made up, but I think he believed I might be able to change it. That once you knew he had confessed all to me, that you might reconsider. Why would he think that? I don't know, she said. Then perhaps you don't know everything, Louise. She took out a handkerchief and blew her nose. Then she sucked her breath in and stood. This is such bad business, such a terrible turn of events, she complained. Our lives were so perfect up until now. Life isn't meant to be perfect, I said. It's an illusion. And if you let yourself think it is, you only suffer when disappointments come. She looked at me with admiration and shook her head. How I envy you for your strength. You've always been so powerful, she smiled. Somehow, I think you'll work all this out, she concluded. And you'll all be safe, I said. She bit her lower lip, glanced at me, and turned to go. Louise, I said when she reached the doorway. She paused, turning. Yes? If you want to be stronger, never let your husband get you to do his dirty work again. I didn't come here for him. You were right, Olivia. I came here for myself, or maybe for my children too, she added. You once said something I never forgot. What was that? Family. Family should be the most important thing of all, she replied. If there is ever anything I can do, please don't hesitate to ask me. I watched her leave, hating her for being strong enough to come.